Well, hello and welcome to the next in our series of studies looking through Luke's Gospel. Today we're starting Luke chapter 6. So if you want to follow along in your own Bibles, I'm going to read Luke 6 verses 1 to 11. So one Sabbath, Jesus was going through the cornfields, and his disciples began to pick some ears of corn, rub them in their hands and eat the grain. Some of the Pharisees asked, "Why are you doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath?" Jesus answered them, "Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry? He entered the house of God, and taking the consecrated bread, he ate what is lawful only for priests to eat, and he also gave some to his companions." Then Jesus said to them, "The Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath." On another Sabbath, he went into the synagogue and was teaching, and a man was there whose right hand was shriveled. The Pharisees and the teachers of the law were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus, so they watched him closely to see if he would heal on the Sabbath. But Jesus knew what they were thinking and said to the man with a shriveled hand, "Get up and stand in front of everyone." So he got up and stood there. Then Jesus said to them, "I ask you, which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to destroy it?" He looked round at them all and then said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He did so, and his hand was completely restored. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law were furious and began to discuss with one another what they might do to Jesus. So here's an episode in Luke's Gospel, the start of chapter 6, which is very much focused on the Sabbath. We've got to know a little bit about the background here to understand what's going on. First of all, the Sabbath back then was a Saturday rather than a Sunday, and it went from sunset to sunset was the Sabbath. And obviously the Sabbath in the Old Testament was a command to keep the Sabbath holy. It was a command in the Old Testament. However, what had happened is the rabbis and the teachers of the law had added, if you like, their own traditions on top. So in order to keep the Sabbath holy, they then came up with a list of do's and don'ts that you could or couldn't do on the Sabbath. And this is what Jesus is challenging in these particular verses. So just an example, let me read to you a list of things you couldn't do on the Sabbath according to the teachers of the law. So you couldn't carry, you couldn't burn anything, you couldn't extinguish anything, you couldn't finish anything, you couldn't write anything, you couldn't erase anything, you couldn't cook anything, wash anything, sew anything, tear anything, knot anything, untie anything, shape anything, plough anything, plant anything, reap anything, harvest anything, thresh anything, winnow anything, select anything, or sift anything. Now you might be thinking, well, why not? Well, because it was classed as work and you weren't allowed to work on the Sabbath. So they classed all these things as work. And the list doesn't stop there. You weren't allowed to grind anything, knead anything, comb anything, spin anything, dye anything, stitch anything, warp anything, weave anything, unravel anything, build anything, demolish anything, trap anything, shear anything, slaughter anything, skin anything, tan anything, or smooth anything, because they're all things that was classed as work. So to summarize, what the Jewish teachers were saying at the time, well, you're not allowed to work on the Sabbath, and here's all the things you're not allowed to do because these are all things as classed as work. Now, this is the problem that Jesus' disciples have because they're going through the cornfields and they're obviously hungry and they feel like nibble some of the ears of the corn and they obviously chewing on it because they're hungry. And the question from the Pharisees is, why are you doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath? Verse 2. Because they think the disciples are harvesting. This is the thing, the grain is in the field and they're picking the ears of the grain. So they're accusing them of harvesting on the Sabbath, which harvesting is work. You're not allowed to work on the Sabbath, so you've violated the Sabbath. So how does Jesus respond? Well, Jesus answers them, "Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry?" And he points to this episode in the Old Testament where the sacred bread was eaten by David and his men when they were hungry. I guess the equivalent today would be at the end of the communion service, if let's say a really hungry person came into church and me giving them the wafers that were left over because there was no other food in the building. And this was a very hungry person, so we're giving them the sacred wafers. And Jesus' summary here is, well, the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. So Jesus is saying he's the Son of Man. The Son of Man is the judge of the universe from Daniel chapter 7, verses 12 and 13. The judge of the universe, the Son of Man, is the Lord of the Sabbath. So Jesus is saying, well, I trump these rules. Not only I am the judge of the universe, so I am judge as to what's lawful and what's not lawful. I am also the Lord of the Sabbath. So he's claiming to be God himself, because who created the Sabbath? Well, God did. So if Jesus determines what's right and wrong of the Sabbath, and Jesus is Lord over what can or can't be done on the Sabbath, then he is claiming to be God. It's a major claim here, and this is obviously what upsets the teachers of the law and the Pharisees. Here's someone who's claiming to have an authority greater than their own. They think they can tell people what to do on the Sabbath, what's work and what's not. Here comes Jesus saying, no, I'm a greater authority, saying what is lawful or unlawful on the Sabbath. So he's claiming a higher authority. So Jesus doesn't just claim the authority of a rabbi and say, well, as Rabbi Hillel wrote back in so-and-so, you should do this. He's actually claiming to be an authority in and of himself. He is a greater authority than the teachers of the law. He defines what is lawful, what is right to do on the Sabbath. And Jesus' general principle here in both of these episodes, the corning episode and the second episode, which is a healing episode, is that the welfare of human beings trumps rules and regulations. So the disciples are hungry, and their well-being trumps whatever rules the Pharisees may have over what you could and couldn't do on a Sabbath. And so the welfare of human beings trumps the law. And then the second episode is obviously a healing episode. And again, the reason why the Pharisees have such a problem with this is because it's a healing on the Sabbath. Jesus is, if you like, doing work on the Sabbath. Jesus is doing work on the Sabbath. Now think about like a modern day example. Suppose on the Sabbath and Sunday, someone has a heart attack in the church service. Should we call an ambulance on a Sunday for them to come out and have to work on the Sabbath and do work on the patient on a Sabbath? Well, we think, well, of course we'd call an ambulance, no matter what day of the week it was, because the well-being of people is important and trumps what may be rules and regulations. Sometimes think about the hero of the emergency services, that there's someone, drowning, and they forget rules and regulations because there's someone drowning. They jump into the lake and try and save them, despite what the rule book may actually say. Human well-being trumps the rules. And this is what Jesus is saying. But he's not just saying that. He's also saying, well, actually, I'm the writer of the rules, so I can tell you what is right or wrong on the Sabbath. And so Jesus is saying, verse 9, I ask you, which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil? Well, if we do evil on the Sabbath, well, obviously that's got to be a Sabbath violation. We're supposed to do good on the Sabbath. We're supposed to do good on God's holy day. And so Jesus is saying, well, of course it's good to heal this man on the Sabbath. It's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It's not a violation of the Sabbath. If he's the person who put into practice the keeping of the Sabbath, he's the one that tells us what's lawful or not lawful on the Sabbath. So do you see, in the eyes of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, Jesus is not a fundamentalist enough. He's not an extremist. He's a liberal. He is undermining the Sabbath here. He's breaking the rules. And to them, this is not just something that is a small thing. This is something that, well, they need to discuss what to do with him. Because if he's breaking the rules on the Sabbath and encouraging others to do so, we need to get rid of this guy. So already this early in Luke's gospel, people are scheming, plotting, and want to get rid of Jesus because he's not fundamentalist enough for them. And so we need to think about our own version of Christianity. In our own version of Christianity, do sort of Christian rules of whatever shape and form, do they trump the well-being of people? Because if so, we've got Christianity wrong at that point.